before I was at S4, I was more or less one of the guys that thought, you know, all these government conspiracy and UFO buffs and things like that were complete lunatics. I even remember before I was involved there, a friend showed me a little newspaper clipping and said John Lear was giving a lecture who was touting that aliens from another world came to Earth and there's 70 different species, and I remember laughing on the phone that this guy had lost his mind.
Hello and welcome to On the Record. Flying saucers, extraterrestrials, monsters from outer space. The government has been telling us for years that they're not real. They're weather balloons, or swamp gas, or reflections from the sun, or the ravings of lunatics. But serious UFO researchers say a breakthrough may be very close. One of the most dedicated UFO researchers lives right here in Las Vegas. His name is John Lear, and he is my guest today. Mr. Lear, thanks for being here.
Okay, George.
To begin with, you're a pilot, an airline pilot, captain. You have held 17 different world speed records at one time or another. You're a member of the famous Lear family that all Nevadans are pretty much familiar with, a former state Senate candidate. You don't sound like the kind of guy who would get hooked up in something that a lot of people would say is a bunch of nonsense.
No, it's just by coincidence that I got really interested. This about 2 years ago. My father saw a UFO and my brother did, and they were very interested, but there was really no proof, as far as I was concerned, to really look into it until about 2 years ago.
Your father and brother saw them. Can you give details?
My brother saw one. He was flying a P-38 from Phoenix to Los Angeles at night. It just appeared in front of him. He made two turns, 90-degree turns. It stayed in front of him and then disappeared. And my father was flying at night, I believe over the Arizona desert, and he saw one too.
So you got an interest because of the other members of your family. How did you start out?
I had an interest, but there was really nothing I could put my finger on. Like I say, 2 years ago, a friend of mine came through town. We had flown into Southeast Asia together, and he was retiring from the Air Force. He came over, and we started talking about where he had been for the last 15 years. And he mentioned that he had been stationed at Bentwaters. And I said, oh, Bentwaters, that's where the flying saucer supposedly was in 1980. He said, no, John, not supposedly, it was. He said, I don't care if you believe me or not. It landed. I didn't see it because we were confined to quarters, but I know people who did, and I'll give you the names, and if you ever see them, tell them you know me, and they'll tell you the whole story. Since then, I ran into one of the security police who was within 10 feet of the saucer and actually saw the three aliens get out and go up to General Gordon Williams, who was the wing commander at that time.
Welcome to the WTF Files. The ultimate aim of all science, to penetrate the unknown. The greatest mystery is right here, right under our feet. These are the stories that will make you say, WTF.
And I was also under the impression that, boy, the government's all for the people, and they, they're out here to protect us and all that. After the experiences I had there, everything is completely turned around. The government is doing everything but looking out for us. I mean, the only thing they're looking out is for themselves. Obviously, the ET craft do exist. Something had to build them, so there must be aliens. And since there are, and the craft are there must be some sort of factory and an entire civilization somewhere. And if in fact that is true, and it apparently is, then there must be others.
Now, when this story first came out, most people thought Bob was just another nut. After looking into his credentials, several people had no choice but to believe what Bob had to say. He also discussed this secret base S4 at Area 51, where UFOs would be tested by human beings flying alien technology. Now, at the time, he said a lot of these flights didn't go so well. Bob showed several videos and lots of photos to prove his point.
Later, as we plowed through boxes of paperwork about his claims, Lazar reiterated his preference that people don't believe his story.
Look, I am not out there giving UFO lectures, producing tapes. This is not a business of mine. I am trying to run a scientific business. And if I'm the UFO guy, it makes it really difficult. It's to my benefit that people don't believe the story.
These days, Lazar and his wife operate a scientific supply firm in Michigan. He's received media coverage because of the odd stuff he sells online, but not everyone has made the connection to Area 51 and the stampede he started back in 1989 when he told of working at S4 south of Area 51, where he saw flying saucers so advanced they had to be from somewhere else. This is a model of the reactor he says was able to generate its own gravitational field, powered by what he called Element 115.
Barry turned on the reactor, which was a flat plate and half of a basketball essentially on it, just a hemisphere. And once it was activated, you could not touch the sphere. You put your hand on it, and just like the light poles of a magnet, exact same type of force. He had a little golf ball, and we dropped it on it, and it never hit the sphere and fell off, and then we threw it at it and it rebounded and knocked the ceiling tile out of place. But it was that alone is something amazing. Look, that can change everything we know today. Just having a machine to produce artificial gravity. Because look at what that does. We know gravity, space, and time are all tied together. There are your shields, like on Star Trek, that deflect micrometeorites. There is your protection from radiation without heavy shielding. There is something that with an intense enough focused field you can actually bend space, and there is something that can actually alter the flow of time. I mean, that's the missing piece of pie.
Didn't they actually freeze a
candle?
Flame for
yeah, now that's when it was connected to the gravity amplifiers where they could focus it, and
They froze a candle?
Yeah, they had a candle lit to set it up for you. Again, there's a large, in the craft itself, there are 3 long pipes. I'd say, well, I don't know about, what's that, 3-4 feet in diameter, maybe 5 feet long. Anyway, they dangle, the 3 of them, at the bottom of the craft. These produce gravitational waves, and they can focus them to a point or spread them apart.
Those are what you call the wave guides?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They're part of the power source control mechanism and the wave. Well, the wave guide is what I actually call the interlink between them, but that's the gravitational engine. They had one of those devices out along with the subsystem that connects it. So they can produce the power from the reactor, it runs the gravity amplifier, and they can focus and change the gravity beam that comes out of it. They took, speaking of Barry, took a candle, put it close to the mouth of it, lit it, a normal flickering candle flame, and then activated the reactor. The gravity wave came out as expected, and the candle flame remained luminous and stopped moving. And
which defies physics.
Yeah, because look, if it's going to freeze it, the photons should stop being emitted. If it's going to, change the characteristics. Look, how can the combustion continue to take place without the convection inside the flame? Because actually, the reason a flame is elongated is not really because of heat, it's because of gravity. Because gravity pulls down and, convection moves flames upward. It's why in a zero gravity environment, flame is a ball, obviously. There's nothing to pull things around. But anyway, if you negate the gravity around it, why is it still pointy? How can it still be making light? And why doesn't it move? Well, I mean, heat, from what Barry said, it's not just gravity, but it's also time locked. You've distorted the
frame of time.
Yeah, they essentially froze a piece of time there, and what do you say? I mean, it's empirical evidence. You're looking at it. It's not
you
a.
can see it.
It doesn't make sense that you could see it. And look, the stuff I saw there was the most unbelievable, literally because it defied what we knew as physics. And at least I thought it did. And maybe what we knew was a little incorrect. They finally did synthesize element 115 that had the properties that I stated. But
it wasn't stable.
Yeah, it wasn't stable. Now, each element has isotopes. For instance, let's talk about hydrogen. We're all familiar with hydrogen. Hydrogen has 3 isotopes. They're all hydrogen. There's hydrogen, protium, be the technical name, deuterium, and tritium. Well, tritium is a radioactive hydrogen. Deuterium is another stable isotope of hydrogen, and regular protium, ordinary hydrogen, is the hydrogen we all know. They're all hydrogen. They have different amounts of neutrons in them. They all have 1 proton, which makes them hydrogen. Now, this is true for all elements. You can have the amount of protons in them determines what element it is. So element 115 has 115 protons in it. It's element 115. Now, depending on the number of neutrons it has, it will still be element 115, but it can be any number of isotopes of it. 115 undoubtedly has, many isotopes of it. We've synthesized 115. We made 1 isotope. We have a radioactive one. Now they just need to continue on working with it. I mean, they made just a few atoms, but we'll see what other isotopes they come up with. One of them or more is going to be stable, and it will have the exact properties that I said.
Or could we make it? Or does it have to be natural? As you speculated about that.
Well,
before.
it's natural. It'd be difficult to find it. I do not think you can make that synthetically. It's just, it takes too much time. I mean, to make, an ounce of it or even a gram would take a tremendous amount of time, because not all the interactions are successful. I mean, you can bang particles together all day long and one may get stuck, and then you've got an atom, and how do you contain, this single atom?
So how do we get 500 pounds of it? Where'd that come from?
Well, it had to either be synthesized by the extraterrestrials that bought it in the first place, or, maybe there was a location where they came from where, look, this was a naturally occurring material. We know that all the material in the universe, essentially all the atoms of all elements, came from hydrogen. I mean, all you really need is just atoms of hydrogen to make anything. Once they start collecting together, large quantities of them, gravity just begins to push them together under their own weight. As long as you have enough hydrogen, that'll continue until they finally crush down and ignite and produce a fusion reaction, and that starts a star. Once the star is burning, it begins to produce helium by fusing, so now you have another new element. Well, this continues on until the star burns out, begins to collapse, and when large enough stars finally do, they crush down, produce supernovas, and then produce a whole host of every element on the periodic chart, far beyond what the numbers we're used to, beyond 115. And, maybe some of these, that's where all the gold, all the uranium, every element you have ever come from, including every cell in your body, has come from supernovas. That's the factory that makes elements. So if there was a location somewhere else that had bigger stars, multiple stars, that burped out more heavy elements than, our local system did, maybe this is common, and you can find stable 115 like we mined for gold on our planets, or uranium. It just depends. If they were lucky enough to have exotic materials like that, I find that easier to believe than somebody built a machine to manufacture such a difficult material.
So it's sort of like a Rorschach test. Aha, they made 115. He was right. It really does exist. Somebody who doesn't want to believe it says 115 doesn't behave anything like Bob Lazar said. It's sitting around in a pile of 500 pounds or something, right? I mean, it's sort of like that.
What is the...
Right. You have to, you just have to start accumulating, whether you believe it or not, and I personally, again, I prefer you don't believe it. Just begin accumulating the facts that you can verify. And really be careful.
But that drives them crazy. I mean,
That's
you need
fine.
to answer this. Now, I need an answer. How many times do you get that in a week still after all this time?
I get. There isn't a day I don't get emails, and I try and get this across to them. look, I don't even want to talk about it anymore. You know, well, I don't believe the story. Great, pass it around. You know, I really don't want you to, because it makes life difficult for me. I'm trying to do serious research. I've got contract with governments and other companies for R&D work, and aside from, other scientific interests, and I want this divorced. Look, if I went and did everything I can to prove my story and reached a tipping point for where people like Stanton Friedman and people along those lines said, you know what, this is beginning to look factual. Do you know how that would annihilate me? That would destroy my business. It would make it impossible for me to operate, and I'd have a continuous flow of questions, annoying people, I'm sure offers to do things that I am not the least bit interested in.
Which is how it was for years.
Yeah.
It was for years,
yeah.
right?
Look, I could have jumped on all that stuff. I could have, at Area 51 sports drinks, and I could have been giving, look how many lectures. At one point I had, what's that talk show host that, what's the guy's name?
Which one?
Geraldo,
Suspenders.
Montel,
Old guy, suspenders.
Larry King.
Larry King. Yeah, I had an open invitation at one time for that show to come on. As the, Geraldo, everybody. I turned down everything.
Montel Williams.
I blew off movie scripts. I blew off all kinds of stuff because they couldn't stick to facts.
Is there a part of you, though, that there's got to be part of you somewhere in there, even though it would be counterproductive, there's got to be part of you that wishes, God damn it, I know what happened, it's true.
No, look, I know what happened is true. There's no doubt, period. There's no delusion, and there are some things I can say that will bolster the case, and I'm not going to. It's going to stay that way. I do regret, at this point, bringing anything forward. Look, at the time, I'm in my early 20s. I went, you know what, this is a crime against the American people. This is just BS, and everybody deserves to know what's going on. And 25 years goes by, you get a little older, and your priorities change. And, what they told me is, this is a security matter, and really, what's the public going to do without this? You know how reactionary they are? There's a bunch of different reasons this is being kept quiet. Nothing that they bother telling me, but the bottom line is they're right. The bulk of the people are complete morons. And I'm sorry, maybe they are right.
I did a lot of checking on him. I find a lot of things didn't check out. That doesn't mean I disagree with everything he ever said, or that he was a liar all the time. It means that I can't buy the story as presented. What all he did out there, I don't know.
Lazar says there's no end to the questions, and even if he could prove he worked at S4, someone would say he must have been the janitor. So he generally avoids the topic altogether.
Oh, you want some of the fame. The fame? There's no big dump truck dropping money off at my house every Thursday night. I'm not out for any fame. I really have better things to do. Generally, people have to twist my arm to come out and do things like that. As you know, you're the arm twister.
Those who were around him at the time the story broke or took the trips into the desert to see the craft fly above S4 say you really had to be there.
Did you see that move it did?
There's a MUFON moron that calls me every once in a while, and he says, well, you don't still believe that guy, do you? And I say, I lived it. The whole 2 years, it was fantastic. It was one of the greatest times of my life.
He wouldn't go through the trouble to make up a story to lie to people and then perpetuate that lie. Bob has no idea who won the Super Bowl or the World Series last year, do you? I mean, he's busy doing scientific stuff and in the Bob Lazar world. He wouldn't waste his time perpetrating a lie on anyone.
Look, I know what happened is true. There's no doubt, period.